All right, yeah, so just so everyone knows, the meeting today is being recorded. So you'll be able to watch it back if you like. And does anyone have a problem with it being recorded?
No.
No problem at all. Just noting an apology from Liz Somerville.
Okay, no worries. Thank
She's
you,
in
Peter.
a compensation meeting in cattle compensation meeting in Victoria today.
That's
I have
fine.
an apology from Ted Speed, Mandy.
No worries.
I'm not sure if he ended up registering or not.
That's okay. Yep, I'll put him down as an apology. Are there any other apologies that anyone would like to add? I haven't got any.
If Charlie Mintz doesn't turn up, then he's an apology. I spoke to him earlier and he wasn't sure whether he's going to be able to
No
hook up or
worries.
not.
I did see him.
Yeah, I'm on, Deb.
Oh, there you go.
You're
There he
on.
is.
Good on you, Charlie.
So I saw he registered, so I thought he'd be here. No problem. All right.
Just checking you can hear me okay, everyone. So Deb, maybe?
Yes, Ron, I can hear you.
Great, thanks.
Okay, well, I think we might just get started. I've just got a couple more let in and then get into it. We've only got an hour today, so I will yeah, I think we'll just get started now. So thank you to everyone for joining. So basically, I'll just give a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today. So the purpose of the meeting is just to give you all a briefing around where we're up to with the Footrot program review. And most of you were involved at one point or another in the consultation. So that's why you've been invited to come along today, because we thought we'd give you a bit of an overview of what was found. And then following this meeting, we'll be releasing the report. Sorry, I've just got another person joining, I think. We'll be releasing the report and that'll be available on, a summary of the report, which will be available on the Livestock SA website. And then we'll also be talking about the next steps in this meeting as well. And as you've all seen, we've got Ron here too. So Ron was the consultant who undertook the review. So most of you are probably pretty familiar with Ron, but he'll be providing about a 30-minute presentation about the process of the review and what he did and what he found and the recommendations that have come out of the review. And there will be time for questions as well from Ron. And then following the meeting, if you have further questions, we can follow them up. So I'll just give a bit of a background. So I think how we got here today was, I guess over a year ago, concerns around the current South Australian Footrot Management Program were being raised. And a lot of those concerns were coming from the southeast and issues around potentially what was happening in the sale yards with inspections and detections and impacts that might have been having on the sale of sheep in that region. And so following that, Livestock SA put together a workshop and we invited relevant stakeholders and people to come along who were involved in the Footrot, which included livestock agents and producers and a PIRSA as well. And we tried to talk about issues around the program and what we could do. And it became very evident in that workshop that it was extremely complex and we weren't going to come up with a solution then and there. But I think most people were in agreement that a review of the program was probably a good way forward. So from that, we contracted independent consultants, Sapire and Biosecurity Advisory Service, which is why Ron's here today, to go through and review the current program and then also provide some recommendations on what we can do for the future of the program going forward. And so that's where we got here today. So does anyone have any questions about that before I sort of hand it over to Ron?
No.
See any hands? Okay, no worries. All right, well, I might hand over to Ron to go through the review with us all. Are you happy to start presenting, Ron? If you have any issues, let us know.
Yep. Oh, geez. It's now told me I can't share my, hang on, I've just got to change something on my system settings, sorry.
It's always the way, Zoom.
Yep.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
It might be that we need to make you co-host. I'll try that one.
Oh, okay. Tell me when to try again.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying. Technology. Okay. No, I can't seem to. Do you have the latest copy of the presentation, Mandy?
Yeah, I do. I've got it here. I should be able to share it.
Let's share that. That might be the easiest way to go.
Okay.
Let me see. Please let me know if this is sharing. You can all see it.
Yeah, I can see that now.
You might need to put it on the other presenter mode though, Mandy.
It's okay. Just if
Okay.
you just.
Yep.
I made a couple of minor changes from what you got here, but I don't
Yeah.
think they're critical, so that's okay.
Okay. Yep, so you can see that okay.
Yeah, just need to put into presenter into
Oh, sorry.
yeah, that's it.
Is that working?
Yeah, that's working now. Good.
Great. And just let me know
Okay.
when you want me to change slides, Ron.
Okay. Thanks everyone. Thanks for attending. This presentation is essentially a summary of what our report is of the program review. Obviously, there was a lot of detail in the report, but I think the guts of it's in this presentation. And thanks for everyone for attending. I noticed there's a lot of names of people that I actually interviewed during this process. So next slide. So what we essentially aim to do with this review is, look at the current impacts of the program, particularly how it was impacting on industry, and look at what were the veracity of those concerns. Evaluate some options in terms of potential program amendments to hopefully make the program work a little bit better for industry, and also to help with that, undertake a detailed economic analysis of the options. So in very simple terms, that's what we did. But if we go to the next slide, it goes in a little bit more detail of exactly what we did. So firstly, we did a lot of consultation in this project. There was an online survey that 276 people right across industry filled out, and that was really useful, and it certainly helped when I then embarked on the face-to-face interviews. I actually interviewed 62 people, either face-to-face or online, most of them face-to-face. I had a couple of trips to South Australia. And then Sapere, the group that I work with, and I mentioned Michelle Hall and Peter McIntyre were the two people I work with there, and they developed this animal health decision-making framework as a precursor to this project, and then we applied it to the findings of the consultation, etc. And the steps in there are, firstly, PESLIOS. That may not make a lot of sense to you, but it's essentially a process where you look at all the different aspects that might impact on an issue. So P stands for political. Actually, I haven't got my list here in front of me now because of the way we're presenting this. But there's the economic, social impacts, economic, etc. That'll be in the. I think that's in the summary report anyway, so you can have a look at those. So it's important to find what the problem is, develop some options, and then we did the economic analysis. And because of the complexity of the Footrot program, we used a multi-criteria analysis. I'll go into that a little bit more detail later. And then lastly, it's important that findings are communicated, etc. And essentially that's part of the process, what we're doing now. Next slide. In terms of the stakeholder interviews, that's just a breakdown of the types of people I interviewed and where they came from. So overall, 30 producers, 62 people overall, but also we interviewed quite a few Footrot experts, former chief veterinary officers from South Australia and elsewhere, livestock agents, etc. So a fair cross-section of industry to get sort of trying to get a balanced view of what was going on here. Next slide. So I'll just very briefly say what the current situation in South Australia is with Footrot. So it's been an official program for over 70 years, and that's been funded by industry since 2012. And essentially, and this is the most important aspect of the program that causes the some of the disquiet in the program is that it's a notifiable disease and movement restrictions apply to properties infected or suspected to be infected with virulent foot rot. And that's under the Livestock Act. So that's where the impacts of the program come from, really, particularly the movement restrictions. In 2019, they moved to using lab tests, the elastase test, to assess foot rot virulence, and also applied a sort of bit more robust process to the program, and that has actually improved detection rates in the program. I'll show a graph of that in a little while. And currently, it aims essentially to reduce animal welfare issues and the economic impacts of the disease. Next slide. And so, as we know, foot rot's it's particularly prevalent in the southeast, Kangaroo Island, Fleurieu Peninsula. And as you can see from that graph on the right, the detection rates, newly infected or suspect properties are the green bars. So the detection rates did go up, have gone up since 2019. There's currently, I think, about 116 properties under restriction, if I remember correctly. I had it in my notes, but I can't see them. Okay, next slide. I thought it might be useful just so that people know what's happening elsewhere across Australia. So in Victoria, the disease is still notifiable there, but pretty much largely unregulated. They actually don't do much, and it's most of the work's done by private veterinarians in terms of helping producers to address foot rot on their properties. Western Australia has a program pretty similar to South Australia, except one specific distance is they do intensive surveillance at the two main abattoirs. So their surveillance arguably could be judged as a bit more effective than what happens in South Australia, where it's a lot of it depends on owner reporting, etc. New South Wales, they've had a regulated control program for many years also. Again, probably similar to South Australia, but they're currently redesigning it with a focus more on an education approach, empowering producers to control disease, etc. So that program is similar to what we're probably suggesting in South Australia. Their program is transitioning. Tassie's that's been fully deregulated for around 50 years. And Queensland, where I was CVO, basically it's notifiable, but we essentially didn't see foot rot in any significant form up there, I think largely because of the climate. Next slide. Okay, we'll get into the online survey and some of the key results there. So the one question was, do you think the current South Australian foot rot control program is achieving its aims? And you'll see there the blue bars, yes, so and the orange bars, no, and it varies across the state a bit depending on the region, but the majority essentially said no, that they didn't think that it was achieving its aims, and there were quite a few unsure as well, and that'll get reflected in some of the other results I'll show. There's really only probably the Eyre Peninsula where there was a significant number of people thought it was achieving its aims, but my understanding is there's not a lot of foot rot over there anyway. But obviously in the southeast where we have and also Kangaroo Island where we have the most foot rot, there's a significant majority didn't think the program was achieving its aims. Next slide. And in terms of the reasons why they say that, some just said the program's not working, so that doesn't help us a hell of a lot. Some said it's still a problem despite the program. Quite a few unsure, and you can see from those answers there, there's a variety of answers in terms of why it's not working. Some say it needs more funding. Some say it needed more regulation, etc. And I think that's pretty all we need to draw out of that slide. So we'll go to the next one. It was disappointing that people were asked what they thought the benefits of the program were, and you can see there that a significant majority essentially thought that the program didn't bring any benefits. But there are obviously other people who did see benefit in the program. So protection from disease, support education provided, production benefits, that sort of thing. I think there's one more slide from the survey. So people were asked what sort of changes they thought were required in the to the program, and this is where it gets a bit interesting. And that there's 70 people said we need to reduce regulation, but another 40 people said we need to increase regulation. So there is a bit of a disparity there. There's also quite a few thought that increased support to producers required. Some thought should just stay the same, but quite a few. There's other things that people suggested were more education, going to a more buyer beware system, increasing surveillance, etc. So I'd summarise that up in the next slide by essentially saying there's across the state, there's sort of two camps, and there's a bit of a divide between the two camps. So there's one camp says we need stronger regulation, surveillance, increased funding, and on the other side we have people saying that it needs to be deregulated, but we need to increase support for producers, and people need to take increased individual responsibility. So there's that two schools of thought that came out quite clearly in the survey, and that was sort of brought out in the interviews as well. And I just have to say that the mob on the right, the camp on the right, are probably the more vocal of the two. So I'll go on to the next slide. I'll get into the what came out of the interviews that I did with people. So there was certainly there was a widely held view across all the stakeholder groups. Pretty much everyone thought that this fear of consequences of being put under movement restrictions leads to very significant underreporting and avoidance, underreporting of foot rot and avoidance of sale yards. For example, people selling their stock into Victoria, etc. And if we think about any disease control program, you need to have an efficient surveillance system to pick up where the disease is if you're going to take action, and that's probably not happening. So it's probably the case that the true prevalence is much higher than the apparent prevalence of this disease, even though we don't actually know the true prevalence. What percentage of properties are infected. The last time there was a survey was 2008. In that survey, 6.25% of flocks not previously known to be infected were found to be infected. I think that was mainly concentrated in the southeast. Certainly came across very strongly that anyone dealing with a positive diagnosis, unless you're in specific circumstances where you can easily destock, it brings high costs and high stress. And everyone thought that whatever program we have in the future still needs to address the animal welfare and production impacts. And quite a few people mentioned that it's a real potential problem. The animal welfare aspects of this is a potential problem in terms of the image of the industry. Next slide. Obviously, producers from the less favourable environments generally had less awareness of foot rot, but they also were concerned that it remained under control. There was a general view, I suppose, across the board that the program doesn't sufficiently suppress foot rot overall across the state. It probably does reduce the number of severe virulent cases, though, and PIRSA have done some estimates on that. In terms of they estimated about 70 properties avoid infection with virulent foot rot a year because of the movement restrictions. But essentially, I've sort of formed the view that the program at the moment does provide a bit of a false sense of security that it's under control, because we've got a percentage under restrictions, but there are a lot more properties out there not under restrictions that probably also infected with foot rot in one way or another. So the risk of introducing foot rot when you buy stock remains pretty high if you don't take precautions. Next slide. And other issues that came out, it generally seems to be seen as a bit of a government program, yet it's industry funded. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. I think that's an important issue. And there was a general view across a wide range of people I spoke to that people need to take more individual responsibility for both control and prevention, preventing the disease coming on their property. Overall, the program is complicated. It's a complicated disease. It's not an easy disease, and it is difficult for producers to understand, the disease and control methods, etc. And a lot of people said they would like more advice and help, or access to more advice and help. People need options to purchase their disease-free sheep and more flexibility in terms of control and eradication options, and acknowledge that eradication is not for everyone. I spoke to a number of people who just eradication really wasn't an option because of their individual circumstances. So good control should be acceptable. That is acknowledged in the program, but the current program tends to put more emphasis on eradication. Next slide. So all these issues from the interviews, they were pretty much consistent with another study done in 2016-17 by Best that highlighted the complexity of foot rot and the negative impacts associated with the social stigma and getting the infection. And so they concluded that we need to generate trust amongst the sheep producing community and work more collaboratively with government in terms of foot rot control. So that was sort of pretty consistent with what I found. Next slide. So quite a few people had ideas in terms of how we could enhance the program in the future. Quite a few did say that we need more investment because there's only a bit over 900,000 goes in the program, and certainly PIRSA resources are stretched. The overall program design, this is sort of more a generalisation that we should be aiming more at reducing the economic, sort of focusing more on reducing the economic impact and improving animal welfare. Really concentrate on the shared responsibility aspect, that is getting industry more involved in the management, and I'll say a bit more about that later. People taking more individual responsibility for foot rot control, trying to build in some incentives. Then there's some, as I said before, some people want to deregulate and others want more regulation. And I'll say a bit more about that in the next slide. But overall, I suppose my comment is, with any disease control program, you need to achieve a balance. And this is the difficulty with this one, is getting that balance right between what's effective disease control and how do you reduce the impact on affected producers. And getting that balance right is the tricky bit. So next slide, I think, talks about the regulation, deregulation thing. Yeah, so the majority of people I spoke to favoured a level of deregulation, and hopefully that would increase the reporting or people taking action if they weren't so worried about the regulatory impacts. But most people also thought that we need to retain some sort of regulatory safety net. So, and that requires further discussion, but for example, the ability to take action on really badly affected flocks, so focus on the animal welfare aspects, and also if people trade infected sheep without disclosure, that's another possible aspect that we could look at. There was an issue around clarifying the existing rights of people if they purchase stock and they're subsequently found disease. So there might be something to be able to do there in terms of even just clarifying it, because people do have rights currently. A lot of people wanted to certainly deregulate the supply of vaccine, not have it as a CVO approval thing anymore. And just a general comment, in terms of if we do go down the deregulation route, will be some the challenges with the existing disease control legislation, although there is new biosecurity legislation planned to be introduced in South Australia, which would make that easier. Next slide. Some other suggested enhancements to the program. I mentioned increased education and support. So in terms of the availability of people who can actually provide that, A lot of people would like to see more practical demonstrations of what Footrot's like and what you need to do. Remove some of the disincentives, and there is a question, even if we did do that, would people take it up? So that's just a query, and we probably won't know that until the program's designed. But it actually does highlight the fact that the detail of the program design will be critical in terms of whether people will make some changes. In terms of prevention, that is preventing Footrot to be introduced to currently clean properties. There are a whole range of measures were suggested, which we don't have time to go into the detail of that now, but certainly improve certification systems so that people can actually certify their flock to be free or not, or people can demand that sort of thing. That was suggested a fair bit. And again, a lot of people suggested people need to take individual responsibility in terms of their on-farm biosecurity, and actually actively do things that prevent disease introduction onto their properties. And that goes for many diseases, not just Footrot. Next slide. And a few others. There were incentives or subsidies suggested that could be included. For example, subsidise a vaccine or bulk purchase arrangements with a vaccine to reduce its cost. And another practical one was whether the program could subsidise the initial consultation with a Footrot expert. Currently, if it's a person, it would be free, but there are a number of veterinarians around who could provide expert advice to people, and it was suggested maybe that first consultation with one of those expert veterinarians could be subsidised. That was one suggestion. Some people talked about a regional approach, so sort of fence off the southeast. But generally speaking, that didn't get a lot of support, and also national approaches. And as a general principle, we in biosecurity these days, we like to have national approaches to these particularly endemic diseases. But considering what's happening across the country and the different approaches, it's probably unlikely that will happen in the foreseeable future. There is the strain-specific vaccine that Sydney Uni developed that's currently not available, and so a lot of people would like to see that become available again. And there is stuff going on nationally about that. Improving diagnostics was mentioned, and also improving genetics, that is breeding sheep that are more resistant to Footrot was mentioned also. There's a fair bit happening on that in New Zealand. Next slide. So after analysing all that and cogitating and thinking about it, I came up with 4 options for consideration and analysis. The first option is just the current program. The second was an enhanced regulatory program. Option 3 is an enhanced industry management of Footrot with some deregulation. And then the option 4 was full deregulation. And I think there's something. Next slide. I just want to make the point that none of these options is perfect. We'll never have the perfect solution for Footrot. It's just too complex and difficult. So none of these options is perfect. And again, we just need to come up with an option that tries to strike the right balance between disease control and reducing the impact on people. So I'll just describe those 4 options in a little bit more detail. Option 1 is essentially the current program, which I've pretty much described. We're going to go back to that one. Yep, pretty well described before. So essentially involves surveillance, and then when we identify properties, putting them under movement restrictions and supporting people to eradicate or control Footrot on their properties. Option 2, the enhanced regulatory program, which is next slide. So to do that, we would probably need to spend some more money. It would involve enhanced surveillance through abattoirs and sale yards to improve detection rates, strengthening the sheep trading declaration system in relation to Footrot status. And I know the program leaders are currently trying to do that at the moment, although it's a little bit constrained by what happens nationally under the National Sheep Declaration, Sheep Vendor Declaration. And but also including some other enhancements to improve support for affected producers, subject to what money is available. And just generally additional resources to support the program. The third option is the enhanced industry management of Footrot. So this is changing the focus more to in terms of providing more support to producers to better manage virulent foot rot. Establish a formal government industry partnership, and this is a really critical part. In my experience, the most effective animal health programs are the ones where industry and government manage it together. So, currently the program is funded by industry, but it's essentially designed by government. And what I fully believe is that there needs to be a co-managed approach. So we need some sort of, for example, a government industry committee to actually design the program and decide on all the detail. So this option also involved enhanced education, awareness, etc., for producers. More support for technical specialists, because there is a limited number of technical specialists to provide that support available at the moment. So that needs to be enhanced, and also enhance the declaration system, the trading declaration system. In terms of the regulatory side of things, what we suggested here is that it remains notifiable, but only take action for those significant welfare issues, or if people are marketing foot rot infected sheep without disclosing it. So still have a regulatory safety net there, but certainly take a bit of a back step in terms of the regulatory action. Perhaps probably retain that it's illegal to sell clinically affected sheep at sale yards or to another property. And deregulate the supply of vaccine, and then incorporate some other incentives that we talked about earlier. Possibly look at some further R&D investment. The fourth option is the full deregulation approach, and essentially, deregulate, it's no longer notifiable, etc. But that program doesn't necessarily need to say we're doing nothing, so it could include things like including some general education awareness, helping people with the supply of vaccine, and there's various other enhancements in the report that could be included depending on the level of investment that the industry still wanted to put in. And I might just mention that I said that in Victoria the program's deregulated, and the reason for that, I understand, is that it was a regulated program. There was a program, and it was funded by industry. But at one point, the industry made the decision in Victoria that they didn't want to invest in foot rot anymore, so they pulled that funding, and that's when the government deregulated it and decided, well, if the industry doesn't want to invest, then neither will we. And that's just something to be aware of in terms of the future, in terms of future design of programs, etc. And it tends to be the way generally it's going across Australia with endemic diseases. Next slide. I won't go into the detail of this one, but the summary report that will be sent out has a very detailed analysis here on one page of the what are the features of the program, the positives of the program, the negatives of the program. So take your time later on to just to have a look through those. We put a bit of effort into this to help us do this the economic analysis. Next slide. So the multi-criteria analysis I mentioned looks at three aspects of each option of the program. So it looks at the costs to industry and government of a program, of an option, the benefits to industry, and then equity considerations. And they were equally weighted 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So the equity thing is looking at the distribution of costs and benefits across industry participants, etc. So essentially is the approach fair? Next slide. And then how that was, each of those aspects was scored on a scale. So there's a cost score and then a benefit score. We did this as essentially rather than a straight benefit cost analysis because of the complexity of this disease and the programs and the options, etc. Using this scoring system was seen to be a more effective and fairer way of doing it than just a straight benefit cost analysis. So the next slide is essentially the final scores that came out in terms of those 4 options. And you can see on the right-hand side, the final weighted score, essentially option 3 came out positive, and option 4 is the base case, so it's a 0, and then the other 2 options came out a negative. Now you can obviously adjust those scores depending on just how you judge some of those different aspects that are scored, but they did do some sensitivity analysis and in terms of jiggling some of the scores a bit, but as they did that, the option 3 always came out as the most favourable one. So next slide. So in terms of option 3, as I said, I've just got 2 slides here. One's the positives and one's the negatives of that option. As I said, there's no option is perfect, but the positives for option 3 were seen that it supports a culture of producer responsibility, taking responsibility. More focus on reducing economic and welfare aspects, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. It is, although they're all different, it is a bit more consistent with generally the interstate programs. Importantly, it really aims to reduce that stigma associated with foot rot, and hopefully should be supported by the majority of producers. And the important thing is looking at leading to a long-term improvement in the on-farm impact of foot rot. And so at the moment, the program really only gets applied to those where foot rot is found, and everyone else is left to their own devices. Whereas this is looking at overall, right across the industry, trying to reduce the impact of foot rot across all properties, or at least those ones who might look to take advantage of it. Other side impact, it's certainly will be a more rewarding role for PIRSA staff. It is a stressful program for them to manage, and certainly anecdotally a number of PIRSA staff have actually left because of the stress caused by administering the program. And if you get more people out onto properties, it improves emergency animal disease detection, which is an important thing in the sheep industry. And I was involved in another project a couple of years ago about disease surveillance for emergency animal diseases, and there is a need to improve that within the sheep industry. But everything's not rosy. There's some negatives or potential negatives. So the next slide. Partial deregulation will certainly be unpopular with at least some people. If there's a lack of formal trading restrictions, potentially will lead to increased spread if people don't do the right thing. We may just get a continued, even if we try and provide the support to producers, there might be a continued just lack of interest from people to do anything. The lack of technical resources to support producers currently is an issue, and this option depends on improving that a bit. So that's just a bit of a risk with the program, and we don't really know. I mean, we'll never know until we do it exactly what the real impact on the true prevalence of foot rot will be. So there's an uncertainty there. PIRSA staff will need to change their mode of operation. That's not too much of a negative, but that's certainly an issue. And if the overall, this is a sort of a consequential issue, is if the program reduces the funding to PIRSA, and that's not a given, it may retain the level of funding to PIRSA, but because of the current cost recovery policies in South Australia, there's quite a few field staff in PIRSA are funded through the foot rot program. So if that's reduced, well, then that means there's an overall lack of capability out in the field if we lose PIRSA staff because this funding is reduced. And I mentioned earlier, could be some implementation issues with the current legislation. So next slide. I think we're nearly at the end. So there's no options perfect, but I've mentioned that a few times, but hopefully that option 3 sort of tries to build a bridge between those two camps that I talked about earlier. And finally, I'll just talk about the specific recommendations in the report. So recommendation 1 is just, you need to know what you're trying to aim for. So it's about reducing economic and animal welfare impacts of foot rot across South Australia. And it's a bit of a subtle difference to the existing aim of the program below, in that there's less emphasis on this eradicating foot rot from infected flocks and more about reducing the overall economic impact of foot rot. So it's a bit of a subtle difference, but I thought that was important. Next slide. So recommendation 2 is, and I think this is really important, that the program should be jointly designed and managed by industry and government, because the devil is in the detail, and you guys need to work it out together exactly what are the detailed aspects of this program. Because option 3, as described in the report, is should be regarded as a general guide. And there'll be quite a bit of detail that needs to be worked out just to try and get it right. But we do specifically recommend option 3 be adopted. And I think the last slide is go to the last slide now. Recommendation 4. It'll take a little while to design this new program, so I've recommended that Livestock SA approve there's an existing application for funding for the next year in with Livestock SA, which is essentially the current program. But I've recommended that be adopted, provided it's managed more in line with the future intended approach. It's just so that the funding can continue for the next year, and it gives you time to actually design the detail of the new program. And the last recommendation is about communication, that needs to be really good communication to industry about the design, the timeframes, etc. And also the program, the full description of the program needs to be a little bit more transparent in terms of PIRSA website, etc., and probably an industry website as well, in terms of actually what is the requirement of the program. I did struggle a little bit to find some details of the program on the current information that's there. I think that's the end of the presentation. But yes, very happy to have a chat about that now.
Great, thank you, Ron. So that was quite comprehensive. So obviously Ron's done a lot of work. So thank you very much, Ron, for all that you've done on this program. Does anybody have any questions for Ron on what he's talked about this morning? So feel free to put your hand up, or, oh yeah, Colin.
Yeah, very good summary. Thanks, Ron. I was just curious. I think Victoria deregulated in the 80s or late 80s to early 90s. Was it ever measured the impact of that change of policy? Because obviously, there were some positives and negatives, as you have outlined. I'd be interested to know if they actually put a figure on it.
Yeah, I did ask that question, and no one could give me a definite figure. I've just got some general impressions, both from Victoria and Tassie, and the general impression is that the overall level probably hasn't changed much in terms of the number of flocks or percentage of flocks infected. But no one's actually tried to measure it, as far as I know. But the impression people had is it's probably pretty much the same.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Colin. Any other questions? We've got a bit of time, so. Oh, Linton. Did you have a question, Linton?
Yeah. Yep. Look, Ron, I wouldn't have envied your job at all. You've mentioned a couple of times it's increasing individual responsibility. Are you able to go any further on how you'd actually see that operating, and what sort of form of individual responsibility should be implemented?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn, and yeah, good to see you again. It's really, I think the most important aspect of that is it's essentially what you've done on your place. You take responsibility for ensuring that or minimising the chances that you'll introduce foot rot onto your property. And people can do a lot of things now to to reduce those chances rather than just go out and, like, you'd be mad to go and buy stores at the moment. You'd be mad to go and buy store sheep from a sale yard, for example. I reckon, unless you put in place, unless you had quarantine paddocks and that sort of stuff. So there's various things you can do to reduce the probability of you getting foot rot. But also people need to, certainly take responsibility for ensuring they control it on their properties if they do have it. There's all the animal welfare aspects, etc., that people, that's a risk to industry if it's not properly managed. Does that answer your question?
Yep, pretty much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Linton. That's a good question. Have we got anyone else with a question? I'm just trying to make sure I haven't missed anyone. Okay, I'll just make a couple of comments, and if you think of a question while I'm talking, please feel free to put your hand up. So basically, this has taken a little while to get to this point, so I do know that it has taken us a while to get here, so thank you all for your patience, but the report has been quite comprehensive. So as Ron said, he did do a lot of consultation, hopefully, with a lot of you individually. And then we did our online survey to get a really good feel around what's happening across the state and how different people are feeling about foot rot and what we can do to improve it. So with that report, we have put together the summary of the report, which will be released hopefully today on our website, or pending any issues, it'll be on Monday. And the Livestock SA board have reviewed the report as well, as has PIRSA, and the board have endorsed the report, and it's also been reviewed by an independent third party as well, and they have also endorsed the recommendations. So the Livestock SA board are comfortable with the findings of the report and implementation of all those recommendations. So the main recommendation there was for the program to continue to be funded, and also to have an industry-led focus more than it has at the moment. So the first step to that, we believe, is to put together a steering committee that will be an industry-led steering committee, and that the role of that committee will be to implement the findings in the report. So to go through, what we found and start looking at the detail around how things will look with foot rot management in South Australia. So we've put together a group of representatives that we think would be suitable to be on that committee, and it is mostly industry representatives. So we have producers from different regions, we'll have livestock agents from different regions, sale yard representatives on that committee as well, foot rot contractors, and also the foot rot program manager from PIRSA would be involved to make sure we're bridging that link between government and industry that was also mentioned in the review. And so that will be very soon, we'll be seeking nominations for that committee. So we'll be coming to groups and ask them to provide us with a nomination of who they would like to sit on the committee. And we're currently working on the terms of reference for the committee as well, so we can start getting it up and running basically as soon as we can. So we can start working through some of these recommendations and the program review. And the other thing that we'll also be discussing as a next step is what happens with the program in this next selling season. So talking to PIRSA and relevant stakeholders as well. So that's something that we'll be following this meeting too. In terms of this presentation that Ron's given today, he's agreed to share that as well. So this recording will be available on our website as well, along with the report summary and the full presentation. So you will get a copy of that. So I know some of those tables are complex and information, so you'll have time to go through it and digest it a bit more. I know it's a lot to sort of hear in one go. And if you do have follow-up questions, and once you've read the summary as well, you can always direct them to us here at Livestock SA, and we'll go through anything with you. But I mean, hopefully the next step, you'll be a lot more involved in the process through the steering committee. So does anybody have any questions following that? I'll just make sure I'm
Mandy, I've got
yeah, go for it, Jen. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could invite veterinarians to be part of the steering committee.
Absolutely. Sorry, you are on my list. So actually,
provide some input.
Yeah, I'll go through the list. We've got a little bit of time. So yes, absolutely. We've got so this is the nomination, the representation list. We'll have Livestock SA and a nomination through our Biosecurity Advisory Committee. We'll have the Sheep Industry Fund nominating a representative. We're aiming to have a sheep feedlot producer, a Kangaroo Island sheep producer, a Southeast sheep producer, and a Northern Region sheep producer, and they will all be nominated through Livestock SA. We want to have a sheep stud producer nominated through the breeder associations, And we'd like to have a Southeast livestock agent, a Kangaroo Island livestock agent, and a Northern livestock agent. And we're looking to ALPA to hopefully help us with that, providing nominations for those representatives and sale yard representatives as well. So a Southeast sale yards representative, and we'll leave it up to the sale yards to provide who they would like on the committee, and a Northern representative for the sale yards as well. A Footrot contractor provided by PIRSA, a Footrot program manager, which will obviously be a PIRSA representative, and a private veterinarian. So sorry, I didn't say the vets earlier, Deb, but yeah. And obviously we've kind of got a couple in mind for that, with their expertise in Footrot, because all of these groups, with the change in the program becoming more an industry focused program, we think that all of these representatives will have a lot more influence over what happens with the program to be successful. So that includes private vets, maybe providing a lot more advice. We'd like to make sure that sale yards and agents are included in all the conversations so that they are aware of what's happening and what their roles and responsibilities will be. And we also want to make sure that we have producers from across the state involved as well, because we know that there are those regional differences in the impacts of Footrot and how people might be managing it. And also, looking at providing continuous updates and communication to people on what they should be doing as the program changes, to make sure that upskilling and education of people is also happening, that Ron also mentioned. So that individual producer and industry stakeholder responsibility to manage Footrot. But there is a lot to do. But yeah, so this is the next step, will be getting that steering committee together as soon as possible, and working together to put forward a more industry focused Footrot program. Are there any questions on that? And so I will be reaching out to all the individual nomination groups as well to ask for their nominees and go through the process with them too following this meeting. So and we can talk through any issues around that. Are there any
just
other...
a question?
Yes, go for it, Richie.
Just a question. I understand how you've built your framework and everything, and I'm not questioning it, but I just find that you get representation from across the state. So you've got the Eyre Peninsula, very low sheep population, your peninsula, very low sheep population, mid-south, mid-north, a bit higher, Kangaroo Island, highly populated, southeast, highly populated, Mallee, medium. Why one rep or an advisor or somebody going on that committee out of a high population area when they should probably have one or two? I just find it gets a little bit unweighted on that basis. And that's just a thought from me, that's all.
Yeah, no worries. We can review that. It's not set in stone at the moment. Like I said, we're still putting together our terms of reference. We've discussed it at our board and our biosecurity committee. But yeah, no, any feedback is good. I mean, we have tried to make sure we've got a Southeast and a Kangaroo Island representative, and then Northern for the rest of the state. But yeah, that's good feedback. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other comments on either the report?
Mandy, it's David Wallace here from
Hey,
ACAS.
David.
How are you?
Good.
I'd like to reiterate that. I think we've down in the southeast seen how this has or hasn't worked, and probably know the pitfalls and the positives out of this whole process. There is a lack of confidence at the moment in that process, and so I think exactly what Rich is. We've seen it firsthand. It's great to see it in an office and set things up, but I think one of the big things I've got out of it is it needs to be very prescriptive, because if you leave it up to people's interpretations, it's just what they think basically. And that's what we did this year, is a lot of people thought different things and it was getting very confusing by the end of it. And as a consequence, producer confidence dropped.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
There was a massive backlash because of that. So I think this working group have to have working documents on processes and clearly articulate that to all parties, because that was a big downfall this year. The interpretation of different parties was poles apart. Yes, no, that's absolutely fair. And that will be the role of this committee, will be to really work through that detail. And as we've seen, another recommendation is around communication. So we'll be making sure it's communicated. And the next step as well, like I said, will be to talk about those interim arrangements, and we can review what happened last year and how we can improve it this year going forward. But yeah, good point and good feedback. I appreciate that. Has anybody else got it? And like I said, you're welcome to provide comments following the meeting, contact me or Livestock SA as well. So if you think of something afterwards, that's fine.
I just want to have another crack if I can, Mandy.
Yeah, go for it.
Like within the survey, Ron, do you actually have a breakdown of the percentage of people that were interviewed or surveyed that actually had foot rot, you know, or never had foot rot, or have had foot rot in the last, you know, or had it and cleaned it up, or, you know, just how people have where they've come from in providing their responses. And I suppose that also flows on to the structure of the new committee, because I think it's also important that there's people represented that have never had it and have come from areas where they still run sheep but have never had foot rot.
Yeah, I'll start off, Linton. I don't think unless you could tell me, Mandy, I don't think the survey.
Yeah, the survey does have, I think, if they've had foot rot before, I'll have to go back and have a look. It's not part of our review, but yeah, and it's a good point about the committee having someone without experience with foot rot too.
Yeah, we pull that out. I certainly did interview people that had never had foot rot. It was interesting though that the people who hadn't had foot rot generally they certainly had less strong views on it and had not as much comment in terms of how they'd like to see the program change, because they hadn't sort of probably thought about it too much. So it's a little bit, if you haven't had it, generally speaking, I found that it's a little bit out of mind, out of sight, you know, and people haven't thought about it too much.
I guess it comes to that point of how it affects different regions differently, and the impacts on different producers. So yeah, that's something that we'll be mindful of with this committee as well, making sure we're trying to get views of people who are heavily impacted and people who might not have been, but how changing the program could impact on them as well. So do we have any other questions? We've still got a minute if anyone's really wants to make a comment or a question.
I'd like to make a comment. Well done, Ron, on the scope and interpretation of your investigations. I think you've done a fantastic job.
Oh, thanks, Deb. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Deb. I think we'll have to agree with that. I mean, this was a pretty tight time frame by the time we got everything up and running for Ron. And yeah, he's did a great job to get as much interaction as he had and as much detail as he was able to get and put this together was great. So he was great to work with. So we have a lot of confidence in this report and the findings. And I think it's given us a really good starting point to go forward and really start to, now we can start looking at the details of the program and work through that. But yeah, thank you very much, Ron. Very appreciative of everything you've done.
Quick question, Mandy.
Yeah, Colin, go for it.
Very quick, and it's probably a bit of a Dorothy Dixer, but the idea of getting this committee, steering committee set up, obviously it's going to take some time, probably a month or two. And ideally we'd have it formed and outcomes developed before the next foot rot transmission period, which is spring, which is obviously going to come around very closely. So there isn't any defined timeline, is there, for in terms of establishment and then reporting?
No, but we'll be setting up this steering committee in tandem with also looking at the interim program. So it's like Chapter PIRSA and other stakeholders. So they'll be happening sort of at the same time. But yeah, we are, like I said, working on the terms of reference now for the committee and looking at nominations. But yeah, probably, I guess, by the time it's set up for his first meeting, maybe a month. So yeah, we'll hope to be looking at these other arrangements now as well. But it's a good point. Has anybody else got a question? I'm sorry if I've missed anyone. Can't see any hands. If I've missed you, just jump in. Okay. Great. So like I said, we will be aiming to get this up today or pending any issues. Otherwise, it'll be on Monday, and we will be sending through the report. Like I said, this will be available, the presentation, the report summary, and this slideshow today as well that Ron provided. So there's a bit of information that you'll be able to go through and tease out. And if you think of any follow-up questions, like I said, you're welcome to contact us here. And we'll be in touch very soon to start working on the next steps and get the steering committee up and running. So thank you all for attending today. You finished pretty well on time. So, and thank you, Ron, for your time for the presentation. If there's no further questions, I'll leave it there.
And well done on your chairing.
Oh, thanks, Ron. Thank you, Colin. Cheers, thanks. Thanks
you very
again,
much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Ron.